Now, our last witness wishes to be known as Tony, does he?
Yes, please.
Please state your full name.
Anthony Roderick Lane.
Take the book in your raised hand and repeat after me. I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth. So help me God.
Tony, you're here to tell us about your late wife, Tricia.
Yes.
What was she like?
A very handsome, outgoing member of the population of Pontyclean. She was very interested in amateur dramatics. We actually met in a church hall. She was at one time deemed to be the mayoress of Pontyclean because of her acting facilities with inside pantomimes. We had a very good marriage. We have 2 children, which we have dragged up. The nitty-gritty of it is that we always made decisions together. And because of my work background, we risk assessed and talked everything through. And then I listened to what she said and took her advice on most things. She was in charge of the family. I was in charge of the finances, provided that she agreed. I wasn't quite under.
We have a photograph of Tricia that you've said you'd like to be displayed throughout your evidence, unless we're looking at documents, so that will be on the screen. In 1985, when she was 41, Trish was diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia. When she was admitted to University Hospital, what were you told about her prognosis?
I took her in at 10 o'clock in the morning at the behest of one of our local doctors. I was told to go away, come back at 7 o'clock when the chief hematologist would see me. I did so. I was ushered into his office. He asked me, do I know what leukemia is? I said, yes. I believe it to be cancer of the blood. He said, well, not technically, it's cancer of the bone marrow. And I said, oh, how serious is it? He said, very serious. We've already given her the first dose of chemotherapy. She has, in fact, put herself into a self-induced coma, and she's not talking to anybody. I went, oh, is therefore this the best place for her? Because I can necessarily, bupa covered, can take her to London. He said, well, consider this. She has less than 5% chance of living to the end of the week. And that was Wednesday, the 12th of June, at 7 o'clock in the evening.
Tricia fought through. She had 7 rounds of chemotherapy and went into remission just before Christmas.
Yes.
You brought her home over Christmas and
Yes.
barrier nursed her at home.
Yes.
And then she went in for further treatment to prepare her for a bone marrow transplant.
Yes.
What kind of transplant was it?
Kind
of bone marrow transplant?
The chief consultant hematologist at the time was one Dr. Jack Whitaker, and he spent a month over in America every year taking up their latest systems. He was on an Air Force base in Arizona, and they were doing autologous bone marrow transplants. He explained what that was. They were done in laminar cabinets, and etc. And what was the success rate? 90% of percentage success for 3 years remission was the American criteria. They offered him the laminar cabinets if he could get them back to us for nothing.
So she underwent an autologous bone marrow transplant during the following year through the June. When your wife was having the chemotherapy, what blood and blood products did she receive?
To the best of my knowledge, she was only platelets. I had, upon her admission, I'd been a blood donor, and there was a great shortage at the time of platelets. So they asked if I would try to be a platelet donor. I said yes, and I became one. And that is what was critical for the recovery after any form of chemotherapy, because the platelets hold your, if you cut yourself or bleed, they hold their hands and stop you bleeding to death.
Were either of you ever told of any risks involved in receiving the platelets?
No.
On the ward, when Tricia was having her chemotherapy and when she was having her transplant, there were some concerns amongst the patients and amongst the relatives about AIDS.
Yes.
What were those concerns?
You have to bear in mind that Ward A7 consists of two parts. You walk down the corridor, straight ahead was Selma on reception, to the left was hematology leukemia, to the right was hemophiliacs under Professor Bloom. And A should never meet B. We weren't allowed to go past that side because we were out of sterile and had to keep the ward as clean as possible and away from, to the degree that if you went in and you were talking to either a relative or another patient, you didn't go up to the bedside, you stood at the bottom of the bed and talked to them.
But what were the concerns amongst the patients and relatives about AIDS?
The concern was, if you remember back to 85/86, AIDS was deemed to be the devil of all diseases and was could be caught from somebody who'd been very naughty, and specifically from America on that side of it. We had not, personally, not many of us had heard of Factor VIII at that time, because our side of the ward did not use Factor VIII.
The patients and the relatives on the side of the ward that Tricia was in were concerned that the blood transfusions and the platelets they were receiving might infect them with AIDS.
Yes.
And you recall in your statement a number of discussions with Dr. Trenchard, who was the Deputy Director of the Welsh Blood Transfusion Service. Yes. What do you recall of those conversations?
I should explain that Dr. Trenchard was the Deputy Director of the Welsh Blood Transfusion Service. He was also the Vice President of the Leukemia Research Appeal for Wales, which myself and two friends had joined unofficially because we were husbands of patients and we could do and say things that the nurses, the doctors and anybody else couldn't do. We were considered to be their hit team. The result of the AIDS thing, there was a big discussion one evening about what happens if a blood donor knows that he's got AIDS, gives blood, it's not checked, and it kills somebody. What's the score on that? I can tell you it was very heated, and it was 100% that it was murder.
That was the views of the patients and the relatives. You've recalled in your statement some discussions with Dr. Trenchard. Do you recall what he said about the blood?
Yes. At a committee meeting of the blood, I asked him about this, and he said at that time, and we're talking 1986, that, quote, all Welsh blood is fully tested.
We've had a response from Dr. Trenchard to your statement, and I should record that he states that hepatitis C was not discovered until 1989, so it was entirely legitimate and truthful to indicate that there was full testing within the knowledge of the viruses that were understood at the time.
Which would mean that there was no knowledge of anything called non-A, non-B hepatitis?
So that could be an inference from his statement. It's quite a lengthy statement.
Well, it's something
he's
to ask him in
provided.
due course.
Exactly. You've said earlier that when Tricia was in hospital, you yourself became a platelet donor. How often were you giving platelets?
I gave platelets from literally, let's say, a month after she was admitted in 85 through to the June of 1997, when I had a letter from the Welsh blood transfusion saying I could no longer give it because of Trish's condition with hepatitis C.
Your platelets were matched on the Welsh system. What did that mean?
If you're platelet matched, you are a designated donor to any specific person who, for argument's sake, has a quadruple heart bypass, who you blood match. And apart from going in once a month, you could be called in especially. If on one occasion, I recall, I was called in on a Monday and something went wrong belly up. There used to be three of us, and we were all platelet matched, usually. And we would give it, for argument's sake, at 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock. And in each case, the blood would be transferred through to UHW for the operation to take place. If the patient still ran out the following day and was still dodgy, we would be called back in, but they didn't like doing that because it was under the month. But on one occasion, they had to.
Tricia's transplant, bone marrow transplant, was successful, and she went into remission.
She went into remission both before the transplant and after the transplant.
She had some ongoing health problems from the transplant. She contracted shingles in 1987 that caused quite a lot of difficulty with her eyes.
She lost her eyesight of her left eye.
And she also had some memory problems.
Memory problems. She had no short-term memory, but the long-term memory wasn't so bad, but the short-term revealed itself when she came home quite some time after the transplant, and she insisted on doing a bit of cooking, which found to be very dodgy because she would turn the gas on and forget to light it. So that was knocked on the head. I also bought one of these electronic gadgets you can put in a plug that smells gas. My daughter here became an overnight learner of cooking under her mother's instructions, and consequently, I did a little bit. And by which time, my mother-in-law, we'd lost my father-in-law, and my mother-in-law moved in with us, so we had 2 cooks.
But you've said in your statement that despite those health difficulties that Tricia had, she was quite active once she'd recovered from the transplant and had a reasonable quality of life.
Yes, she tried her best. For instance, I used to take her, she'd been in the choir since she was 11, the church choir. And I used to take her to church on a Sunday morning, walk her up the aisle again, and then put her into the vestry where the choir members would take over looking after her. They insisted that she sat on the wall side next to the radiator so that she wouldn't be cold, and there was, whenever she moved, there was one of the choir members either side of her, and they brought her home.
In 1997, you received a letter from the Welsh Blood Service. Paul, can we have document 2365002, please? And it will come up on the screen in front of you, Tony. The letter is addressed to you because, of course, by then Tricia, as you say, had lost her sight, so couldn't read it. But we can see here that it says, you may have heard or read in the news about hepatitis C. And then the second paragraph, some donors who'd given blood before testing started have now been found to have this virus in their blood. Our records show that you may have received blood in 1986 from a donor who's now tested positive for this virus. This does not mean that any blood you received was infected. It would, however, be sensible for us to discuss this with you. If you wish, we can test your blood for infection with the virus. When Tricia and you received this letter, what was Tricia's reaction to it?
Oh, why me? Oh, well, look what I've been through, etc. Very down. What can be done about it? I suppose, no, I don't really want to know about it. Let's carry on, because we had a quality of life, not excellent, but up until that point we had a quality of life. We were doing things like going to church, she would do, right? And we were quite happy. Our friends were quite happy. They knew the rules about sitting away, not coming up to kiss her, for instance. Don't come if you've got a cold.
So Tricia just wanted to leave things as they were, whatever would be, would be.
Yes.
What was your reaction to the letter?
Think of the children. What are we going to do about that? This could be dodgy, or we'd got to find out about it. It took me until the July, I believe, to talk her into going in to see, and we phoned up and we made an appointment to go in to the haemophilia clinic in UHW on the ground floor.
And when you went to the hospital, what were you told?
We were sat down opposite, the consultant was sat opposite me. Trish was here, and he held up a foolscap sheet of paper and put his finger on it, and it came down the line, came down the page, and he said, Lane, yes. Patricia, yes. Hospital number, I said 8368821S. And he said, right, that sorted that. I've got a bit of bad news for you. We tested your last load of blood, and we wish to take blood from you today to confirm, but we believe you've got hepatitis C. We'd also like to do a biopsy.
Before that appointment, were you or Tricia aware that she was going to be tested for hepatitis C?
We had a letter saying that it was hepatitis C, but we didn't really understand what that was all about.
So at that first hospital appointment, further blood was taken to confirm whether it was.
It was confirmed. She refused a biopsy, point blank. Quote, they're not opening me up again.
You were provided with a leaflet about hepatitis C
Yes.
at one of the early appointments, and you've described that as really rather basic.
Yes.
Were you able to tell people about Tricia's diagnosis of hepatitis C?
Sorry?
Were you able to tell anybody outside of the hospital about the diagnosis?
The answer to that was no. We kept it very quiet, but we still carried on. Semi-barrier, people coming in, yep, etc.
Why did you feel unable to tell people that Tricia had hepatitis
Because
C?
we recognised the stigma and the worry. We were also warned that we should tell dentists, doctors, anybody else that has to examine Trish, right, that immediately they must be told that you've got hepatitis C. So we clocked that up.
For a number of years, Tricia was quite well after that diagnosis of hepatitis C.
Yes.
And her blood tests show that her liver was functioning fairly well for a number of years.
Yes.
She was adamant, wasn't she, that she didn't want any treatment for the
Yes.
hepatitis C.
We were on a little tablet. That's all.
Why was she so determined not to have anything in terms of full treatment?
There wasn't a question about it. She didn't want to know about it, for argument's sake, a liver transplant or having a biopsy. She was very adamant about not, for want of a better description, opening her body up at all, again.
And the advice from the doctors was, wasn't it, that the liver function tests were okay?
Yes?
And so it was up to her to decide whether she wanted treatment or not.
Yeah. And this, added to that, we went to a clinic in Royal Glamorgan where there were two clinical assistants, supposed to be Hep C, and also a Macmillan nurse. And we got on well with the Macmillan nurse.
You remember her gradually declining over a number of years, but then in July 2015, Tricia contracted cellulitis.
Yes,
She was in and out of hospital for a period,
yes,
and then she was admitted to hospital for the final time.
yes.
Why was she admitted at that point?
She was admitted. I had to call out the night doctor because she wasn't at all well, and it was found that she had very low blood pressure by the night doctor, and he immediately called an ambulance and took her into Royal Glam.
In that final admission and into hospital, were you ever told what was wrong with Tricia?
We were told that she had a liver problem. I'm not sure if the word cirrhosis was used. I don't recall it, but it might well have been. It was felt by me from the September right the way into the October. We were on Ward 20 and we were put in bed 11, which was right tight up against the doorway. And we were deemed, because of my attendance there, and the lack of nurses, we became like the ward watch, as well as I was trying to keeping Trish. But Trish, I think, had decided enough was enough. Throughout her life, she had always maintained that she must die first because she couldn't manage without me. And she used to tell friends that quite straight out. I believe honestly that she didn't want to know. She kept asking continually, please let me go home. I tried. They wouldn't even contemplate it. They said, no, we've got to do physiotherapy. So I had no choice. Then I think it was Trish died on the 11th, so it must have been the 9th. I was in there and I was asked to leave the bed side, and out came a group of nurses came and tried to get her out of bed. I was in a room and a doctor came in and explained then how serious it was. They're trying to get the wife to stand, to take her up, send her up to Luna Pier. She didn't want to know. At that point, I firmly believe, and I knew my wife, she had shut off and decided that's it.
And you said earlier that that was the point at which you were told that it was a liver problem that
Yes.
Tricia had just 2 days before she
Yeah.
died. Until then, you weren't clear.
I wasn't clear
was
exactly
wrong?
how strong it was because the house doctor's statement was, I think it's time to call your children in, because I'd explained that my son lived up in Hertfordshire.
Tricia died on the 11th of October 2015, aged 71. Can we have document 2365009, please? It's Tricia's death certificate.
Oh, yeah.
And it records the cause of her death as hospital-acquired pneumonia and then other significant conditions, cirrhotic liver disease, secondary to hepatitis C. You've said in your statement that you wanted to ensure that hepatitis C was on the death certificate.
Yes.
Why was that so important to you?
Because that's what we were told she had. And we'd heard rumours that they wouldn't put it on there for whatever reason. And if you look at it carefully, you will see that number 1 is hospital-acquired pneumonia, and then item 4 is chronic liver disease secondary to hepatitis C. I spoke to after her death, I spoke to the registrar up in Pontypridd, and I explained the situation that I wanted hepatitis C on her death certificate. And she said, well, I can't do that it's got to be from the hospital, based on the hospital's document. I said, oh, okay. So I came back to the hospital, told them I wanted hepatitis C, and they told me to come back tomorrow. My daughter came with me, and we went in. It was in a sealed envelope. I explained that I was going to open it on the instruction of the registrar, and she said, oh, no, you're not. You can't open it in the hospital. So I said, pardon? And I said, oh, right. So I was going outside and opening it, and she followed me out, and we were outside the doors of the hospital, opened it up, and I saw hepatitis C. It was on there. I didn't realize the significance of it until I talked to a friend of mine who happened to be a doctor as well as a barrister. And when he knew my wife, okay? So when I explained it to him what it is, he said that should read, in his opinion, right, and this is his opinion, she actually died of coronary heart failure because she stopped breathing. The second one was hospital-acquired pneumonia, chronic liver disease, Hep C, and the last one should be leukemia, acute myeloid leukemia. That's how he would have written it out. But he is only one doctor, and he's Irish. But that's what I feel, that there is a certain amount of, how shall I put this and be nice, statistical shenanigans going on. Because looking at that, the average person, I would say to you, would say that she died of pneumonia. And it's possibility that that is the answer in the statistics. And I don't want to know.
Tony, you've lost a much-loved wife and your children have lost a much-loved mother. What can you tell us, if anything, about how that's affected you as a family?
My son got married and worked out of London, stroke the home counties, and up into Hertfordshire. He's an architect and a developer. This one is a lawyer. And my daughter, she lived with me, and then when my mother died, she took over my mother's house. It affected the children. I won't forget this, because you've got to bear in mind that when, on the 12th of June, Trish told me that night not to tell anybody that what she had, that I was to tell them I was for tests until a week that following Monday, because Karen here was doing her O-levels, and we didn't want it to affect. So I had to kid the whole of the village that my wife was in there for tests for 11 days. That I found difficult, especially telling the vicar not to come near me, because that would have been a dead giveaway. And you got things like that. And I found it difficult, because going back into the hospital then, having told them what was the matter with our mum, our mother was there, my mother was there, and they were obviously going to have a chat, but I'm going back in at 7 o'clock at night, and I said I will be back at 10 that night. and I will answer any further questions on how your mother is that night. I came in, I said, oh, I'm dying for a cup of coffee, went into the kitchen. The next thing I know, my son comes into the kitchen, shuts the door behind me, looks at me and says, is Mum dying? Oh, how do you answer that? Right. I said, Christian, I believe it's right to say that you're dying from the moment you're born. And we left it at that.
Tony, those are the questions I have for you. Is there anything else you'd like to say in relation to the hepatitis C?
Sorry?
Those are the questions I have for you. Is there anything else you would like to say in
right.
relation to the hepatitis C?
Firstly, I'd like to thank the chair and all your staff, sir. I think you've done a wonderful job. You've opened up Pandora's box. Please don't let the government of any political persuasion close the lid on you until you have come to your conclusion, which I personally would hope would include the provision that your civil servants, not necessarily under your control if you wish to retire, sir, control any future compensation for any person who has put in papers to you in the form of witness statements, which to me shows a commitment of the general public to get answers and a result. Because at the moment, it is chaotic financial situation for all the people that have put in papers to you. There are differences between the 4 areas of the United Kingdom, which promises were made in March would all be equaled up, and to the best of my knowledge, nothing has happened at all about it. I have a proposal to put to you, an idea, but I won't do it at this point. I will put to you in private afterwards, if I may be cheeky enough. And but I must say it is based around the fact that one of the soliciting companies based in London called Collins sent a letter to my Watkins and Gunn informing me that they could no longer deal with me because I was an affected person by somebody who had died of blood transfusion. So they won't want to know anything about, they don't want to do anything about me, so I don't want them to do anything with my documents, and I would like them back. Can I ask you to ask them back?
Well, I think you need to ask Collins for that.
Right? Because as far as I'm concerned, I did everything they asked from me. I sent them up a witness statement, a lot.
I think this stage is not the stage to negotiate with your former solicitors. This is the occasion to give evidence about the terms of reference. And I don't think our terms of reference actually allow us to interfere or intervene between solicitor and client. And I'll be corrected if I'm wrong on that. No. But I'm sure those who are listening will have heard what's been said and will take it forward if they think it appropriate. I can't say any more about it, really, because I don't have the power to do it, however much you may want me to have. But I will say on the other matters, since you've raised them, that I'm very grateful for the offer of a private suggestion, but I don't take evidence in private. That's not the way that this inquiry is run. It will be run openly and transparently. And I take the view that if things are worth saying, they're worth saying openly. And I hope you'd agree with that. I think your style, if I may say so, is forthright, and I'm sure you do.
I don't take prisoners.
You could put it that way. And on the same vein, you can be sure that whatever Pandora's box may open up, no political party is going to persuade me to close it if I don't think it right.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir.
There are no questions from Mr. Williams, and that's everything I have.
Thank you. There are some moments which can seem to be staging posts in any enterprise, and an inquiry is one of those. This, in a sense, is a staging post, because with the evidence of Tony, we have finished our evidence here, and Cardiff is the last of the centres outside London, which we shall be visiting to take evidence from those who are infected and affected. So this marks, as it were, the end of that period. It's not the end, however, of our taking evidence from those who are infected or affected. Far from it. It is vital, I think, that we go on doing that as much as time permits. We don't have the luxury of much time. You will have seen that reflected in some of the evidence throughout this week, and even today we've been reminded that every 4 days somebody will die. And those are the people we know about, and we may not know about all those who have suffered from hepatitis C, because they may not know themselves that they do. So it's worth reflecting on. But you will have seen, I think, and I speak not only to you, although there is a large audience here, but also to those who may be watching online, who may have attended the sessions in Belfast or in Leeds or in Edinburgh, as well as those in London. You will have seen, I hope, the value that has come first from bringing the inquiry out of London. It's where it belongs. It is a UK-wide inquiry, and I take that seriously. But out of London, because each of the different parts of the UK has a slightly different perspective. And some of you, I know, have followed the inquiry round and been present at a number of the hearings, and you'll have seen that. The stories are very much the same. The similarities are much greater than the differences, but there are some differences. And now perhaps is a time for me, at any rate, to reflect on some of those. But you'll also have seen that there has emerged throughout, concentrating on the similarities, many themes which witness after witness after witness repeats. And the more that they are repeated by witnesses, giving their testimony honestly, the more difficult it becomes to ignore what those themes are. And the themes you will have picked up are themes which relate, and I put it very broadly, for obvious reasons, to consent, to communication, to delay in informing people of a diagnosis which was known about by medics, to the way in which people were treated by others, or thought they would be, stigma, all these general accounts, and the advantage of having a number of witness statements and witness testimonies supporting those statements is that you begin to get a very clear and consistent picture. There are also parts of people's accounts which are individual and can only ever be individual because of their remarkable nature. But they may themselves, if there are enough such accounts, begin to paint a picture of their own. And I'm thinking here about the sorts of correspondence which sometimes has emerged from those bodies which are set up to care for and support people, who are in need and use words which suggest that the heart of those administering the scheme may not be where it should be. And I think of examples, and yesterday's example was not the only one. I'm thinking here of the experience of the Smiths, in which we have heard evidence, obviously highly individual in that case, but not the only example of highly individual stigmatization, where it may seem that we are in danger of becoming a society in which, instead of sympathizing with and offering a caring hand to somebody whose child is seriously ill, our hands instead reach for the spray can of abuse. The reason I mention these individual accounts is that I am quite sure that there may yet be more which will emerge, and we have not finished taking evidence from those who would wish to give it. Far from it. Our next hearing will be in London. It will be on the 8th of October and again on the 15th of October. Those dates have already been announced. But I can tell you that so important have we found the evidence to emerge from the hearings here, and also so great has been the number of witness statements received and promised. Those people who have contacted the inquiry to tell us they wish to give a witness statement, the number is approaching and about 3,000. We haven't yet got that number of witness statements. It's less than 2,000, but moving upwards. But it shows how many more statements will come through. And there is, I suspect, still a number of people who would wish to give witness statements. Every witness statement will be read. Every witness statement is individual. Every witness statement is important. Every witness statement paints a picture, or helps to paint a picture, or confirm the picture that others have painted. And so each has a real value. And some may have those little snippets, those little pictures, which may tug at the heartstrings, or horrify, or illuminate, or praise some medical services that have been received, whatever they may be, but all of which is important in painting an accurate and whole picture, without which any report I produce will be the less convincing. And so we have this third week of witness evidence arranged for October, which will begin on the 29th of October until the 1st of November. So if you ask, where do we go from here? The answer is there'll be a break. It is, after all, the summer, but our work will go on during most of that. We will meet again to hear witness evidence on the 8th of October, the weeks of the 8th, the 15th, not the half-term week for obvious reasons, but the 29th of October as a third and additional week. We have not yet finalized the witness lists, those who will give evidence in London. So anyone who wishes to make a statement and whose statement is received will be considered for the possibility of giving evidence orally. But let it be said that giving evidence orally does not necessarily mean that that evidence is of greater importance. Every piece of written evidence is important. Every piece tells a story. Every piece is taken into account. For those who do not feel able to make a witness statement, it may look easy sitting up there. I don't think anyone who's given evidence would say that it is actually easy, even though they may have looked as though it was. We do our best to make it as easy for the witness as we can, but I suspect it is still difficult. And it seems to me if I can just say, it takes huge courage, actually, to condense a lifetime of suffering, largely, and everything that's happened into about an hour of testimony. It is actually, if you think about it, it is a hugely difficult task, and it is likely to stretch the emotions for anyone, let alone do it when there has been the threat throughout the 70s, 80s, 90s, at least, if not later, of stigma, the reactions of others to what is not the fault of the person suffering. It makes it very difficult. I take my hat off to those who've given evidence. I do admire them, and I don't expect that it will necessarily be easy for everyone. Anyone who makes a witness statement must be prepared, if asked to give witness evidence. I have to say that if they don't want to give evidence, it's unlikely that we'll ask them to do so unless there's a very, very special reason for it. But there are maybe people who can't even bring themselves to make a witness statement. Can I remind them that they can speak to an intermediary who will not identify them? They will not then be at any risk at all of anyone knowing who they are, but they can tell their story to somebody who will then relay the collective experience of the people who have spoken to that person to us as a proper professional, and that will take place during the October sessions or in our November sessions. I'll come to those in a moment. But the important thing that I'm encouraging by speaking to you here, I'm really preaching to the outside world, is that if you feel that you might wish to add to the knowledge that we have to help us to paint the complete picture, do not feel that your account is unimportant. It isn't. If it is similar to accounts which have been heard, that doesn't mean to say it is of no value. It is of great value because it actually supports and confirms what has been said. And we would like to hear it. And every witness statement will be read. For those who have listened to the testimony here in Wales, you may have been very moved by a lot of what you've heard. It may resonate with what you yourselves have been through. Can I remind you that if, when you go away from home, away from the collective comfort of this hall, and if you feel that some of the aspects of the testimony are troubling you, be reminded that there is the Red Cross helpline, which is available, and that through it you may get access to counselling should you need it. Please don't feel that you have to bear the burdens of what you've listened to on your own, because you don't. Can I then come back to what I was going to say about the future progress of the inquiry, just so that you know? I'm not going to spend too long on this, but in November, on the Thursday the 21st and Friday the 22nd of November, and the following week, Tuesday the 26th, Wednesday the 27th, and Thursday the 28th, we will be taking some evidence from our experts. It'll be two parts. One will reflect, as we will be reflecting on what we've been hearing over these first 3 months and in October too, about the impact on people infected and affected from our experts on the psychosocial aspects. And then we will be asking our clinicians to begin to set the stage for what will follow later. They'll be talking about current clinical knowledge about haemophilia, about other blood and bleeding disorders, and primary immunodeficiencies. And the others will be speaking about the current clinical knowledge of hepatitis and HIV, and current and past treatments for hepatitis and HIV, and their consequences. That will help to set the stage for what will then follow after a necessary break later next year. I should say that you'll understand fully that we want to be as prepared as we can be as an inquiry for the evidence which will follow then, which will explore from others of what happened and why, those people who took decisions, those people who may have questions to answer, and examples of the sorts of material which they may have to deal with are things such as the email exchange which you heard earlier today. These things come out, and they come out sometimes slowly. We want to make sure we have as much of that as possible. So you'll understand why there will be a break. It's not that we're not working. We are, even though the working may not be as visible as it is today or as it will be in October. But it remains then for me to repeat really what I've already said. I want to pay tribute to those who've given evidence and those who've been here to support them, which has enabled them to give evidence in the way that they have and to inform me. And I am most grateful that my eyes continue to be opened. Sometimes when you think that you can't see anymore, you realize there is much more to be seen. And with that, can I thank you for being here and wish you a safe journey home, particularly if you're traveling any distance today on heat-affected rails.